bloody gaijin! Sato is ours! You want to get him?
Red Steel for the Wii is the video game equivalent of some sort of PG-13 rated straight-to-DVD action movie. It can be fun for a while, but it's going to have you shaking your head once all is said and done. The analogy runs deeper since the plot is straight out of a movie like that. You're some guy named Scott, and your pretty Japanese fiancée is kidnapped by the Japanese mob, so you grab a gun and go after her, and you get a sword too. It's all an excuse for you to go shooting and slashing your way through a bunch of industrial settings, plus some rustic Japanese levels toward the end.
Okay, I give up. Did you really have to destroy absolutely everything?
The plot's filled with some painfully bad dialogue, some of which can at least be unintentionally funny, but the story sometimes goes so far as to get in the way of the action, like when there's some unskippable cutscene in the middle of a tough firefight you have to keep replaying over and over. Red Steel's got some compelling ideas, but nothing about it is particularly good in execution, and it's filled with run-of-the-mill shootouts and sword fights that feel more like two cavemen hitting each other with clubs than like two highly trained samurai going at it. You play the game using the Wii remote and the nunchuck attachment. It's a promising setup, and the controls for shooting and sword fighting are pretty different. The shooter portions make up the vast majority of the game. In these, the nunchuck's analog stick moves you around, and a quick swing of the nunchuck is used to open doors, reload your weapon, and a few other actions. Meanwhile, the Wii remote controls your turning and aim, and initially it'll be distracting, not immersive, to see the in-game hand holding a gun awkwardly emulate your own wrist movements. You press down the A button to go into an aiming mode, and you can zoom in by moving the Wii remote forward, which isn't intuitive, but it works. There's a generous auto-aim window to help you line up your shots, and once you get used to these controls, they do work pretty well. However, they don't feel better or any more realistic than the standard controls used for other first-person shooters on consoles and the PC. These are just different. The shooting itself is highlighted by some destructible environments and really over-the-top explosions. But the enemy artificial intelligence is pretty lacking, as sometimes you'll see guys running right past you and doing other boneheaded things. Up until late in the game, it's easy to kill bad guys in droves, especially since your health quickly recharges if you avoid taking damage for a couple of seconds. Of course, you've got those sword fights in addition to all the running and gunning. The sword fights are presented awkwardly because you're always forced to put away your gun, and the duels are conveniently uninterrupted by other gun-carrying enemies. The sword fights can be challenging, but they don't feel realistic at all. Enemies fall prey to basic patterns and exploits, not to skillful maneuvering. You don't have a lot of moves at your disposal, and the on-screen movement lags behind your swings of the Wii remote. It also seems impossible to perform any thrusting or stabbing moves, even though your enemies will. On top of all that, not an ounce of blood is spilled during the sword fights, which makes the title of the game seem rather misleading. Once you've spent the 10 hours or so finishing Red Steel's single-player campaign, there's also a split-screen multiplayer mode for you to mess around with, but there's not a lot of lasting value here. There are only 4 multiplayer maps to choose from, and the modes are all based on a standard deathmatch. There's one particularly weird mode, but overall the action in multiplayer feels quite flat, and the game's presentation definitely doesn't help. Red Steel has an interesting control scheme, and some of the action is decent, but that's about the best that can be said for it. The presentation might have looked good had this game come out on the GameCube like 2 years ago, but by today's standards, it's seriously below par. At least there are some good sound effects and music, but that's hardly due compensation for the sluggish frame rate and numerous noticeable bugs and glitches throughout this game. Your curiosity might compel you to give this game a shot anyway, and as long as you approach this mediocre shooter without expecting much, you might find a few redeeming qualities in it.